Martin had once been a renowned ventriloquist, renowned for his uncanny ability to throw his voice and bring his wooden companion, Mr. Ruggles, to life on stage. But over the years, the crowds had dwindled. These days, Martin spent most of his evenings the same way, slumped at the bar, drinking himself into oblivion. "Another whiskey," he slurred at the bartender, his words slightly muffled by the tattered cloth doll slumped on his chest. The bartender sighed and poured another glass. As he drank, Martin's eyes glazed over, his attention focused inwards. Soon he would be drunk again enough for Mr. Ruggles to awaken. Mr. Ruggles was no ordinary dummy. His painted eyes seemed to follow Martin even when packed away in the darkness of Martin's case. And on those drunken nights when Martin passed out, the doll seemed to take on a life of its own. Martin had first noticed it a few weeks ago. Mr. Ruggles' eyes, usually so lifeless, seemed to flicker subtly whenever Martin drank himself unconscious. At first he convinced himself it was just an illusion brought on by the drink. But over time he began to harbor a creeping suspicion about his silent companion. By midnight the bar was empty, and Martin was slumped over in his chair, dead drunk. As if on cue, the doll's eyes flickered open. With stiff, jerky movements, Mr. Ruggles turned his head and scanned the room. The coast was clear. Moving slowly, so not to wake his companion, the doll climbed down from Martin's lap. He had work to do. Mr. Ruggles crept through the darkened alleyways, keeping to the shadows. He came upon a familiar apartment building and scurried up the fire escape. As he reached his destination, the lights flickered on in the apartment. Mr. Ruggles froze, becoming just another inanimate doll. Soon a portly man stumbled out of the apartment, reeking of gin. It was Billy Mack, an old rival of Martin's back in the glory days. As Billy drunkenly made his way downstairs, Mr. Ruggles seemed to smile. Then, smooth as a shadow, he followed after, keeping to the darkness. The vengeful spree had begun. Martin woke with a start, head pounding. He didn't recall getting home last night. As he sat up, Mr. Ruggles toppled off his lap onto the floor. That's odd, he thought. He was certain he'd left the doll at the bar. As he prepared his morning coffee, the TV droned on about last night's news. Martin froze. Billy Mack had been found dead in the alley behind his apartment, body mutilated. A chill ran down Martin's spine. For a split second, he thought he saw Mr. Ruggles' painted smile twist into a sinister grin. But that was impossible, right? Over the next 2 weeks, Martin followed the same drunken ritual, passing out at the bar with Mr. Ruggles at his side. And each morning he awoke to news of another gruesome murder on the TV. All of them were real people who had wronged Martin in the past. Agents, critics, fellow performers. Martin began having vivid nightmares of Mr. Ruggles skulking about at night, leaving behind a trail of bodies. He shook his head, trying to clear his mind of such crazy thoughts. Mr. Ruggles was just a dummy, a silent piece of wood and paint, wasn't he? Martin paced his apartment, clutching Mr. Ruggles tightly as if to stop him from escaping. His drinking lately had been out of control, and the twisted nightmares persisted. He could no longer ignore the truth staring at him in the painted face. "It's you, isn't it?" Martin shouted, giving the doll a shake. "You're alive." Mr. Ruggles simply grinned up at him with that chilling smile. Martin's hands trembled. He had to stop this, cut the strings that connected them before anyone else got hurt. With panicked resolve, he dumped his liquor down the sink. No more drinking, he told himself. It was the only way. Weeks passed, and Martin held true to his vow. At first it was agonizing, but he persisted. To his relief, the mysterious murders had ceased with his sobriety. At night, Mr. Ruggles sat silently in his box, almost disappointed. Martin began booking small shows again. He found he no longer needed the drink to lose himself in the ventriloquist's art. His performances were raw and honest. Mr. Ruggles played his part perfectly, but his eyes no longer seemed to gleam with a hidden malevolence when Martin's back was turned. As Martin regained a sense of hope and purpose, the nightmare seemed to be over, but the fate had one more grim twist in store. It happened after one of Martin's modestly attended shows. He was walking down the dim back street behind the ramshackle theater when 2 men jumped him, pinning his arms behind his back. Well, look who it is, the washed-up dummy guy," one spat as they rifled through Martin's belongings. They found nothing of value, then smashed his beloved wooden case to splinters while Martin watched helplessly, too weak to resist. The thugs stumbled away, laughing as Martin crumpled to his knees, clutching the cracked remains of Mr. Ruggles. Years of sobriety and restraint crumbled to dust, replaced by an all-consuming hunger for revenge. The dummy's eyes seemed to flicker with a familiar malice as Martin made his decision, this time willingly. At the bar, Martin ordered double after double until the world spun out of control. He welcomed the darkness as it engulfed him. Mr. Ruggles' eyes sprung open, brisk and alert. The doll climbed down and crept out, unseen by the few drunks slumped around the bar. He had a name, an address, a face etched in his mind. The innocent mask had slipped. Mr. Ruggles' smile was one of malevolent intent. The shadowy figure tracked the thugs to a rundown squat. There he enacted a brutal vengeance, slashing and slicing as the men screamed for mercy. But this pint-sized serial killer had none to give. By sunrise, Mr. Ruggles limped back to the bar, trailed by bloody footprints. His rage sated for now. He allowed his strings to go slack once more. Martin awoke, bile rising in his throat as the memories came rushing back. He had sent Mr. Ruggles to kill, and the vile deed was done. As he gazed into the doll's faded eyes, he was filled with revulsion, not at the dummy, but at himself. He had crossed the line from which there could be no redemption. In a twisted way, they were now partners in crime. Martin hid from the news of what had transpired in the night, too ashamed to hear the grisly details. But in his heart, he knew Mr. Ruggles was merely a physical manifestation of the darkness that lurked within his own soul. Gently, Martin picked up the disfigured doll that had once been encased in a handsome wooden box. A strange bond had formed between them, tragic and inevitable. He cradled the dummy with remorse and resignation. "It seems we are bound together by forces I cannot comprehend," Martin whispered. "But we will go on, you and I." Mr. Ruggles grinned up at him, his painted eyes devoid of judgment or mercy. Their fates were intertwined now until the bitter end. Alone in his apartment, Martin sat motionless with Mr. Ruggles on his lap, thinking back over the years. He had tried to be a good man, to bring joy and laughter into the world, but in the end his choices had led them here, to a place of unredeemable corruption. Martin sighed, releasing the last faint stirrings of resistance within him. What was done could not be undone. He and Mr. Ruggles now inhabited a nightmarish realm beyond good and evil, reason and remorse. Together in the darkness they would remain. With a sad smile of resignation, he lifted Mr. Ruggles up. The dummy's eyes glinted back eerily as he spoke aloud the words that bound him forever. "It seems we are both damned."